The first time Amara saw him, she didn't believe he was real. He stood at the edge of the marble foyer like a statue chiseled from pride and pain, tall, sharp-suited, and still. Not the stillness of calm, but the kind that warned of storms brewing deep beneath the surface. His name was Elias Crane, and he was known throughout the city as the man without a heart. Amara Reyes had heard the whispers long before she stepped foot into the Crane Foundation building. Stories of how Elias built an empire from nothing but grit, silence, and sleepless ambition. Of how he'd once walked away from his mother's funeral without a single tear. Of how he never smiled, never lingered, never allowed anyone close. She didn't believe in gossip, but the moment their eyes met him on the balcony above, her on the lobby floor clutching a file too tightly, she knew every word had been true. Those grey eyes didn't just look at her, they looked through her, as if she were no more significant than the paper in her hands. She told herself it didn't matter. She was just an intern. Just a name on a folded badge, just a girl from a quiet village who'd studied hard, worked harder, and somehow landed a spot in the prestigious Crane Foundation Arts Mentorship. She had no illusions. People like Elias didn't notice people like her, but what she didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Elias did notice her. Not in that moment, not exactly, but in some distant, hidden place within him that had long been closed off. Something stirred, something he'd forgotten he could feel. Amara was 20, the youngest in the program and the only one without a private university degree. She had a sketchbook worn at the edges, hands always smudged with charcoal, and a voice that trembled when she was nervous, which was often. But she also had a quiet strength, a way of looking at the world that softened sharpness. She saw colors in things most people walked past without a second glance. On her first day, the elevators were down. She climbed all 12 flights of stairs to deliver a restored canvas sketch to the top-floor executive suite, panting, late, and wide-eyed. The secretary gave her a sympathetic look and pointed toward a glass office. She knocked. No response. She entered anyway. He was there, of course, Elias Crane, at his massive desk, surrounded by windows that looked out over a city he practically owned. He didn't look up, didn't speak. Just gestured to the side table where she was to place the artwork. "Sorry," she murmured, her voice barely audible. She placed the piece down and turned to go, but then he spoke. "You're not from around here?" She froze. His voice was deep, not harsh, but it had a finality to it. Like every word he said had already been measured and weighed before it was spoken. "No, sir," she replied. "I came from Camila Springs. That's 4 hours south. 5, if you take the bus." He looked up then, briefly, his eyes flicked to hers, sharp and observant. Why would someone from Camila Springs end up here? Amara didn't know whether to laugh or shrink. To learn, to prove something, I suppose. His stare lingered. To prove what she thought about her mother's hands, cracked and tired from years of factory work. Her father's silence at dinner after another long day of driving trucks. Her little sister asleep in a room too cold in the winter. The heater broken again. "That someone like me can matter here," she said. Then quickly added, "I mean can contribute." Elias didn't respond. He turned back to his computer. "You can go." She walked out feeling like she'd said too much, or not enough. She didn't know which. In the weeks that followed, Amara saw him occasionally, always from a distance, always alone. He moved like a shadow in a world of glass and steel, while she blended in among interns and assistants, doing her work quietly and well. But there was one thing she couldn't stop doing: sketching. In the quiet hours before the building filled with noise, she'd sit on the marble steps outside and draw. Not for the program, not for the internship portfolio, just for herself. Faces she saw on the train. A cat that lived behind the sandwich shop. A child crying on the sidewalk, holding a wilted balloon. One morning, she was drawing the lobby sculpture, an abstract metal twist Elias had commissioned from a famous sculptor. When she heard footsteps behind her, she turned. It was him. He stood there, watching her sketch, not saying anything, not even blinking. The silence stretched. "Do you always sit here?" he asked finally. "Only when I'm early," she said, trying to hide the fact that her hands had gone cold. He looked at her notebook. "You captured it." She blinked. "Captured what?" "The chaos inside it. No one ever does. They just draw the shape." Amara wasn't sure how to respond. No one had ever spoken to her about her drawings that way before. Like they meant something. Like she meant something. "I don't try to copy," she said softly. I just try to understand. Elias studied her. Not just her face, but the way she held the pencil, the curve of her wrist, the way her eyes flicked upward with uncertainty, like she wasn't used to being seen. Something shifted in him. He didn't know what it was, only that it unnerved him. So, he turned away. You shouldn't be here before security arrives, he said, and walked off. It wasn't rude, just matter-of-fact. Still, she felt like she'd broken some invisible rule. That night, she stayed up sketching the moment, not the sculpture, not him, but the feeling, the strange sense that something had cracked open. It wasn't love, not yet. It wasn't even friendship. It was just a flicker, but flickers, when protected, become flames. By the end of that month, Amara had been called up to help with the gallery restoration project. It was rare for interns. Elias himself had approved it. She found out only later, from a shy administrator who said, he asked for your sketchbook, said you see things differently. And suddenly, she was part of something bigger, managing, lighting angles, assessing shadows on aged pieces, preserving emotion in oils and acrylics. And sometimes, late at night, she'd find him in the main room, standing before a canvas like it had challenged him to a duel. He never said much, but when he did, it wasn't about work. Do you believe people can really change? He asked her once, out of nowhere. She glanced at him, surprised. I think some people spend their whole lives changing, others never do. What makes the difference? Amara thought about that for a moment. Maybe someone who believes they can. Elias didn't reply, but that night, he stood a little longer beside her sketch before walking away. They never talked about love, never even used the word but in the unspoken. Something grew. It was not a romance like the ones in novels. It had no sweeping gestures, no grand confessions. It was built slowly, one glance, one conversation, one vulnerable moment at a time. He didn't know she was a virgin, that she had never kissed anyone, never given herself to a love she didn't trust. She didn't tell him, because she didn't think it mattered. And yet, in a world that measured everything by cost and value, her heart remained the only thing untouched. He'd been touched too much by betrayal, abandonment, and the cold currency of power. She'd been untouched, but not by choice, by fear, by caution, by waiting. And yet, somehow, the untouched and the overtouched found a place between them where nothing else had to be said. This was not the story she thought she'd be part of when she boarded that bus from Camila Springs. But as she sat one evening under the atrium light, sketching the city skyline through a Rain Street window, she knew something was happening. He was beginning to sit beside her, and he stayed, not for long, not every day, but he stayed, not because he needed her, but because, for the first time in his life, he didn't want to be alone. And that, she thought, might be where all love begins. He had spent his entire life building walls no one could climb, brick by brick, word by word, silence by silence. Elias Crane was a fortress, not because he loved isolation, but because he feared what might happen if he let someone see the man behind the marble. But Amara Reyes had a way of walking into quiet spaces without making a sound, and somehow leaving behind light. She never demanded his attention, never begged for time, and maybe that was why he began offering it freely. It started with a chair. One cold morning, she entered the gallery's restoration wing and found a second chair pulled beside her work table. Not spoken about, not explained, just there. She didn't ask who placed it, but she knew. And that day, he sat beside her, didn't say a word, just observed, as if watching her fingers clean a century-old oil painting was more fascinating than the hundreds of meetings waiting beyond those walls. Every morning after that, the chair was there. Amara wasn't sure what made her more nervous, the weight of his silence or the way her heart skipped whenever he glanced her way. But there was something beautiful in that silence too, something that didn't need filling. I used to come here at night, he said once, without prompting, before the place opened, before it became something. She looked up from her. Brush surprised you, he nodded. Just me in the dust. I didn't know anything about art then. I just liked the way it made people feel something they couldn't name. Amara smiled. Art does that. It gives emotion a shape. Elias turned his eyes to the painting she was restoring, a soft blue landscape bathed in golden light. That's what I needed back then, a shape for what I couldn't explain. She tilted her head. Did you find it? He looked at her. Then, long and steady. Not yet. That answer stayed with her, not because of its honesty, but because it meant he was still searching. still open, still unfinished. In a world that applauded certainty, Amara had always felt more at home with people who weren't done becoming themselves. And Elias, for all his power and polish, was more undone than anyone she'd ever met. She began noticing things. How he never interrupted, how he never rushed, how he read every label on every piece of art in the gallery, like the words might hold secrets he'd missed the first time. She also noticed how the other interns spoke about him with awe, yes, but also fear. They called him the Iceman, Crane the Cold, the Iron Curator. She hated the way they laughed behind his back, never once considering that maybe his silence wasn't pride, but protection. One evening, while everyone else left, early for a rooftop gala, Amara stayed behind. She preferred the gallery when it was quiet. She sat alone, sketching a sculpture in charcoal, the edges smudged into soft shadows. Most people draw the sculpture, a voice said behind her. You're drawing the shadow. She turned, startled. Elias was there, standing just a little closer than usual. I like shadows, she said. They're part of the truth too. He stepped beside her and looked down at the sketch. You see things people don't notice. I think people only notice what they're ready to understand. He smiled then, just barely. A small thing, really, but to her, it felt like the first bloom in winter. You ever think about selling your work? He asked. No, she said quickly. It's not for that. What's it for? She hesitated. For remembering, feeling. Sometimes I draw things I don't even know I understand yet, but later, the drawing tells me. He didn't reply, but his gaze lingered on her hands, stained with black smudges, delicate but steady. There was strength in them, but not the kind that shouted, the kind that held things carefully, even when the world wasn't careful with her. She knew, somehow, that Elias noticed the small things, the way she wrapped her sandwich in brown paper to save money, how she hummed softly when she worked alone, how she paused to read the plaque under each painting, not once, but twice. But she was also beginning to notice things about him, how he ran his hand along the edge of a frame without realizing it, how he watched the rain fall like it reminded him of something long ago, how he wore the same watch every day, scratched, old, probably worthless, when he could afford 100 new ones. And then there was the letter. She found it by accident, folded inside a vintage art catalogue in the archives. She hadn't meant to pry, but the paper slipped out as she shelved the book. And before she knew it, her eyes had caught just one sentence. I'm sorry, I didn't come back. I was afraid of what you'd see. No name, no signature, just sorrow, just truth. She placed it back carefully, as if it were glass. Later that day, she saw him in the main hall, standing alone beneath a skylight as grey clouds shifted above. He looked older, somehow, or maybe just more human. I used to think loneliness was strength, he said quietly, not turning toward her. That if no one could hurt you, you'd be free. She stepped beside him, close but not too close, and now he exhaled slowly. Now I wonder if freedom without connection is just another kind of prison. Amara looked up at him. Sometimes the hardest part of healing is realizing you want to. He turned toward her, and for a moment, the room felt suspended in air. Why, aren't you afraid of me? He asked. I was, she admitted, at first, but then I realized you're not cold. You're careful. There's a difference. No one had ever said that to him before, not once. And though he didn't respond with words, the silence that followed felt different this time. Not empty, full. A few days later, the annual Crane Foundation fundraiser took place, a grand glittering event attended by the city's elite. Amara wasn't invited, of course. Interns weren't expected to mingle with CEOs and collectors, but she was asked to help prepare the exhibit room, setting up display lighting for a rare private viewing. She was adjusting the angle on a frame when she heard a voice behind her. I hoped you'd be here. She turned, surprised. Elias was dressed in black tie, but even that didn't disguise the weariness in his eyes. I'm just working, she said, a little breathless. You shouldn't be, he replied. You should be attending. I don't have the right shoes, she joked. He looked down. They look fine to me. She smiled softly. You don't really care about the gala, do you? No, he said. I only came to see who would come back after it was over. Amara paused, confused. Why? Because that's who I want beside me. His voice was quiet, but the words rang louder than the chandeliers above. She didn't reply, not with words, but she stayed. Long after the guests had left, long after the lights dimmed, They sat side by side on the gallery floor, surrounded by silent masterpieces and stories frozen in canvas. She told him about her little sister's dreams. He told her about the brother he once lost. They didn't cry, they didn't touch, but somewhere between memory and midnight, something sacred passed between them. It wasn't passion, it wasn't infatuation. It was something slower, deeper, like the roots of a tree growing quietly underground before anyone sees. A single leaf. She had never been with anyone before, never trusted anyone to know her like that. But with Elias, she didn't need to give herself all at once. He didn't ask for her heart. He just made space for it. And he, the man the world called cold, began to thaw. Not with heat, but with presence, with trust, with stillness. She didn't change him, but she reminded him who he was before the world told him not to feel, and that she would later understand was a kind of love no one could fake. A love that wasn't loud, but a love that could last. Asterisk. The sky outside the gallery turned a pale, bruised blue as winter crept in, unnoticed by most, but not by Amara. She had always felt the change of seasons in her bones, not just the cold, but the quiet. And this winter, something in her life shifted too quietly, and without asking permission. It began with a phone call. She was alone in the gallery's lower floor, cataloguing a new shipment of sculptures from a private collection. Her hands covered in white gloves, her mind halfway lost in thought. The call came from her mother. At first, her voice was calm, composed, but then she paused, and in that breath, everything changed. "It's your sister," her mother said. "Something's wrong." Amara felt her heart fold inwards. She left the gallery without explanation, without saying goodbye. Just a note on her desk, and a message on her manager's phone. The train ride home felt endless, not in hours, but in fear. And when she arrived, her little sister Layla was curled on the hospital bed, pale and asleep. A tangle of 4 lines wrapped around her small frame like vines. She fainted during class. Her mother whispered, "They're running tests." Amara didn't sleep that night. Not because she couldn't, but because she wouldn't. She sat beside Layla, drawing quietly in the margins of her sketchbook, trying to give shape to a storm she didn't yet understand. Back at the gallery, Elias noticed her absence the moment she didn't arrive. She'd never missed a day, not one, not even when she had a fever the week before, and worked in silence, sipping tea and refusing to go home early. Now, 2 days had passed, and her desk sat untouched, her chair left at an angle, as if she would return at any moment. He waited until the 3rd day to call. She didn't answer. On the 4th day, he called again, not from his assistant's line, but from his own dial, and this time she picked up. Her voice was softer than usual, strained. "I'm sorry," she said first. "I didn't mean to leave so suddenly." "I'm not calling to scold you," Elias said. "I'm calling because I noticed you were gone." Silence. "My sister's sick," Amara said. "They don't know what it is yet." He didn't offer sympathy in the way most people did, with easy words or hollow reassurances. Instead, he said, "Do you need anything?" She didn't know how to answer that. "No," she said, even though the truth was yes, but he understood anyway. That evening, a delivery arrived at the hospital. A sketch pad, thick textured paper, and a set of charcoal pencils in a leather wrap. No note, just a quiet gift from someone who had learned how she spoke when she wasn't speaking. The next morning, she began drawing again, not to pass the time, but to stay connected to the part of herself that hadn't collapsed under fear. Her drawings shifted, no longer art pieces, but expressions of the ache in her chest. A pair of hands reaching through glass, a single tree, in a snowstorm, a girl with a candle in the dark. And when Layla finally opened her eyes after 5 long days, Amara smiled so hard it hurt. "You're here," Layla said. "I never left." The doctors didn't have all the answers yet, but they ruled out the worst. That was enough for now. When Amara returned to the gallery, something had changed. Not in the building, not in the art, but in her. She walked slower, spoke softer, saw more, and Elias noticed. She didn't expect a grand welcome, and she didn't get one. But when she passed his office, he was standing at the door, waiting. "You okay?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I will be." And that was enough. For both of them, later that week, he invited her to accompany him on a trip. Not a date, not a gesture, just an invitation. A gallery in the countryside had acquired a lost collection, early 19th century portraiture, hidden in a private estate until recently discovered by accident during renovations. I'd like your eyes on it, he said. You see things I miss, she agreed. The train ride was quiet at first, but slowly, the landscape outside began to open them both. Wide fields, scattered trees, a soft blanket of fog hugging the hills. You used to draw, didn't you? She asked suddenly. He glanced at her. A long time ago. What did you stop for? He looked out the window. Life got louder than art. She tilted her head. Maybe art's the only thing loud enough to survive life. He looked at her then, for a long time, and for the first time, she saw the boy beneath the man, the one who once believed in something, until the world told him not to. At the countryside gallery, they walked among frames, draped in linen, still unmounted. Amara moved from one to the next with gentle curiosity, pausing at a portrait of a woman in blue, her eyes fierce, her mouth soft, as if she had loved and lost in equal measure. Elias stopped beside her. She reminds me of someone. He said, he said, and before she could reply, he walked on. That night they stayed in a small inn, booked last minute due to fog on the roads. 2 rooms, no assumptions, no pressure. But as the snow began to fall, and silence filled the space between the rooms, Amara sat in the hallway, her sketchpad on her lap. She was drawing again, not to escape, but to stay present. She didn't hear the door open, but she felt him. Elias sat across from her on the floor, dressed simply, without pretense. What are you drawing? He asked. You. He blinked, surprised. Why? Because tonight, you don't look like the man in the newspapers. You look like someone who needs to be seen. He said nothing, just watched her hand as it moved across the page, tracing the lines of his jaw, the weariness around his eyes, the way he sat, not stiff, but vulnerable. When she finished, she turned the sketchpad toward him. He stared at it for a long time. I don't recognize myself, he said. You will, she whispered. Eventually, then came a moment, one neither of them planned for, yet both felt approaching for weeks. A quiet pause where something unspoken passed between them. Not an invitation, not a confession, just presence. I'm scared, he said. Of what? Letting you see everything. She closed the sketchpad. You don't have to show me everything, she said. Just don't hide. He nodded, and the walls, the ones he built so long ago, trembled. They sat in silence again, not because they ran out of things to say, but because sometimes silence is the truest form of trust. The snow kept falling outside, and for the first time in years, Elias Crane didn't feel cold. He felt real, he felt alive, and he knew, deep in his bones, that Amara Reyes was not just a chapter in his story. She was the page he had been trying to find all his life. The gallery had changed since her return, or maybe Amara had. She moved through the space differently, now still quiet, still observant, but there was a subtle fire behind her eyes. One that hadn't been there before. Her time away had not broken her. It had refined her. She no longer walked like she was afraid to be seen. She walked like someone who had decided she belonged. It didn't go unnoticed, especially not by Elias. He watched her from the upper floor, where he often lingered near the mezzanine railing, appearing to study the layout below, but in truth, he was watching how Amara interacted with the art, with visitors, with the world. There was something in the way she stood in front of a canvas and tilted her head slightly that made him feel like the painting had been waiting for her to arrive. She didn't know yet, but people had started to ask about her. Who's the girl with the sketches? Is she part of the new curation team? There's something about her, something grounding. Elias didn't respond to those questions, not out loud, but internally, he knew. She wasn't just part of the gallery now, she was the living heart inside it. It was early January when the email arrived. A small private museum in Florence was curating a global showcase of young, undiscovered artists, those who had never shown their work publicly, but whose portfolios hinted at brilliance. Elias had received the request first, sent to him by a colleague who trusted his eye. He read it once, then again, and then he printed it, folded it carefully, and slid it into the front flap of Amara's sketchbook while she was away for lunch. No note, no name. Just the page when she found it that evening. She read the invitation twice before her hands began to shake. Elias didn't say anything the next day, or the one after that. He gave her space to process, to wrestle, to dream. But on the third morning, she found him near the East Wing, reviewing a newly installed sculpture. I'm not ready, she said. He didn't look up right away. Ready for what? My work. It's not perfect. he asked, finally turning to meet her gaze. No one's is. It's not like theirs. It's not supposed to be. She hesitated. Why me? He considered this for a long moment, as if weighing something fragile in his mind. Because in a room full of curated perfection, your work breathes, he said. It lives, and that's rare. Amara. She said nothing. But that night, she stayed late in the studio above the gallery, the one he had quietly opened for her weeks ago, and never entered without invitation. The windows overlooked the quiet city. The heater buzzed softly, and Amara painted, not for the showcase, not for Elias, not for anyone, just for herself. She lost track of time. It wasn't until well past midnight, when she realized someone was standing quietly in the doorway, watching. It was Elias. He didn't speak, didn't cross the threshold. He just stood there, a rare softness in his posture, as if he too were afraid to disturb what she was creating. I thought you'd gone home, she said, wiping her hands. I couldn't sleep. Do you always come here when you can't sleep? Only when I want to remember what it feels like to be inspired. Amara's brush hovered over the canvas. You used to feel that way, he nodded. A long time ago. Before everything became about deals and auctions. Before I forgot why I fell in love with art to begin with. She turned to him. Then maybe this isn't just about my work. Maybe it's about yours too. He looked at her, and something in his chest shifted. She wasn't just a spark in the corner of his world anymore. She was the light dot in the days that followed. They began working more closely together, curating the spring exhibition, reviewing artist submissions, sketching ideas late into the evening with music playing quietly in the background. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was something deeper, a connection rooted in mutual respect, in shared silence, in the realization that some bonds didn't need grand declarations to be real. Then came the invitation to the gala. Somerset Gallery was hosting its annual Winter Art Benefit, an event Elias had avoided for years. Too many suits, too many forced smiles, too many people pretending to care about things they didn't understand. But this year, something felt different. He wanted her there, not to parade her around, not as a date, just as herself, as the reason he'd started to feel like maybe life could be more than deals and deadlines again. I won't fit in, she said when he mentioned it. You don't need to, he replied. They should adjust to you, not the other way around. So, she went. She wore a simple black dress, nothing flashy, her hair pulled back in a soft bun. No makeup, except a touch of color on her lips. She walked into the event beside Elias, and for a moment, the entire room seemed to pause, not because of what she wore, but because of the quiet certainty she carried. People asked questions. Some judged, some admired. Elias didn't care either way. But later that night, after they left the noise behind and walked along the empty street outside the gallery, Amara turned to him with a small, thoughtful smile. You know, you never told me your favorite painting, she said. He slowed his steps. What if I don't have one? She looked up at him. Then maybe you're waiting to see it. And for the first time in years, Elias Crane smiled, not the professional smile, not the polite one. A real, genuine smile that touched his eyes. I think I already have. She tilted her head, puzzled. Where? He looked at her. Just her, right here. The night grew colder, but neither of them felt it. They had no idea what storm was coming, what decisions would be forced on them, what sacrifices would test everything they'd built so quietly, so delicately. But for now, there was this moment, two souls, standing still, and the quiet understanding that something extraordinary was happening between them, even if the world wasn't ready to understand it. The gallery lights were dimmed now, the evening hours long past closing, yet the silence inside felt different, almost tense, like the hush before a thunderstorm. Amara sat alone on the top floor in the private viewing room, the one only Elias and a handful of others had access to. Her sketchbook was open in front of her, but for the first time in days, her pencil didn't move. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her stomach, in her throat, in the air itself. She hadn't seen Elias in nearly 2 days, not since the night of the gala. He had left her at her apartment that evening, with a look she hadn't quite known how to read. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. It was like something had broken open behind his eyes, and he didn't know whether to let it fall out or hold it in. And then he vanished. No messages, no calls, no notes, just absence. It wasn't like him, even at his most distant. He never completely disappeared. But now, the silence felt louder than words, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he was keeping something from her. The next morning, a letter arrived at the gallery. It was addressed not to Amara, but to Elias' official letterhead, heavy parchment, sealed in deep navy wax. She didn't open it, of course, but she saw the name on the return address, Marwick and Dorrington, a London firm, prestigious, private, and most concerning, connected to a long-standing scandal Elias had never spoken of, but that the art world whispered about behind closed doors. The inheritance, the lawsuit, the estranged family name he no longer used. Marwick and Dorrington weren't just lawyers. They were the gatekeepers of a past Elias had tried very hard to bury. She didn't want to pry, but she couldn't help wondering, was this why he vanished? Hours passed before she finally gathered her things and turned off the lights. But as she stepped out into the alley behind the gallery, a shadow moved. She froze. Then, slowly, it stepped into the light. Elias. His coat was half unbuttoned, his hair slightly disheveled. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said quietly. "You didn't," she lied. They stood there for a long moment, neither speaking. The cold pressed in. "I was going to call," he said finally, "but you didn't." "I didn't know what to say," she studied him. "So say nothing." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that betrayed his exhaustion. "You deserve honesty. I just don't know how to give it without ruining everything." "You won't ruin anything," she said, "unless you keep hiding." He looked at her then, not just glanced, but really looked, as if she was the only real thing left in his world. "I have to go back to London," he said. The words hit her like a crack of thunder. "Why?" "My father's estate. It's complicated. I left years ago and never wanted anything from that world, but they're pulling me back in now, and if I don't go, everything I've built here could be taken from me, Somerset included." She stepped closer. "What do you mean taken?" "The board," he said. "Half of them are tied to the family trust. If I don't secure the ownership rights now, they'll strip me of it. The gallery, the collection, everything." Amara's voice was quiet. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow." The word fell like stone between them. She swallowed. "And when do you come back?" "I don't know." Silence again. "You should have told me," she said. "I know, Elias. I can't hold this place together alone." "You won't have to," he said. "You'll have the studio. You'll have the trust of the staff. I've already sent an internal letter naming you acting curator while I'm gone." Her eyes widened. "You what?" "You're the heart of this place now," he said, softer this time, "even if you don't see it yet." The next morning, Elias was gone. No farewell visit. Just a message left on her phone. Not his voice. Just a text. "Take care of it. I trust you." And so she did, but not without struggle. The first week was a blur of meetings, endless decisions, and whispers from senior staff who questioned her role, her authority, her presence. But Amara did not bend. She rose. She studied the archives, consulted with artists. She brought in school groups and late-night viewings. She even initiated a program that invited underprivileged youth to experience the gallery for free, something Elias had once mentioned in passing but never implemented. And slowly, the staff began to shift. They saw her, not as a placeholder, but as a leader. Weeks passed. Then months. Letters arrived from London, but never from Elias. Only updates from attorneys, sometimes forwarded through the gallery's legal office. The negotiations were long, painful. His father's estate had left everything tangled in red tape, and Elias was trapped in a life he'd tried to escape for years. But one afternoon, Amara received a package, a brown paper-wrapped box postmarked from OXFORDSHIRE. Inside was a sketch. Her own drawing, the one she had done of him that night in the hallway. Only now, it had been delicately framed, preserved under glass. And underneath it, a note. "This is how I remember who I am. I'll return when I'm free to be him again." No name, no promise, just the truth. Amara pressed the frame to her chest and closed her eyes. She wasn't waiting for a fairy tale ending. She was building something far stronger, something real. But even she didn't know that everything was about to shift again, because not everyone was happy about the changes she'd made. And the next storm was not from the past, it was from within. The sky over Somerset Gallery was unusually grey for spring. Clouds hung low, heavy with something unsaid, like the city itself was holding its breath. Inside, The once quiet rhythm of Amara's life had shifted. She had grown into the gallery like ivy, slowly, quietly, and then all at once twisting into every corner, giving new life to walls that had forgotten how to feel. The space no longer felt like a museum of silence. It felt lived in, alive. The scent of oil paint drifted from the studio upstairs. Music played softly in curated corners, and Amara, once a girl with hesitant footsteps, now moved with calm command. But not everyone celebrated the transformation. It began with missing documents, a delivery that never arrived, a client account inexplicably closed. Then came silent glances during meetings, curators avoiding eye contact, a few board members asking odd questions like, "Do you have any idea when Mr. Crane might return?" Something was unraveling. Amara could feel it. Then came the letter slipped under her office door. No name, no signature, just a printed message in neat black ink. "Not everything is yours to save." At first, she thought it was a mistake, or worse, a coward's threat. But then she found the second letter, this time in the backroom archives. Then a third one, inside her sketchbook. Someone was trying to push her out, quietly, systematically. It wasn't until she overheard a conversation to board members near the stairwell, whispering about transition planning, that she realized how real the threat had become. "They're planning to remove me," she said that night on the phone. There was a pause on the other end. Elias's voice, when it came, was quieter than she remembered. "I was afraid of this. Why didn't you warn me? I thought naming you interim curator would be enough. I thought they respected what you built." "I built nothing without you," she said, "but I'm not going to let them undo it." There was silence again. Then, "I'm coming back." "No, not yet," Amara said firmly. "Not until you're ready. If you come back now, it'll only prove them right, that I was just holding your place." He breathed in slowly. "Then what are you going to do?" She looked out the window at the city. "I'm going to remind them what art is for." The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. She launched a public exhibition titled Unspoken, filled entirely with pieces by unknown artists, street painters, late bloomers, voices that had never been heard. She invited local musicians to play during the evening viewings. A poetry night emerged. Then a sculpture workshop for the blind. People came in waves. Critics, families, children, elders, and then reporters. Who is this woman breathing life into the old world of galleries? How Somerset Gallery's new direction is breaking class barriers in art. It was the kind of storm the board couldn't control, and it terrified them. But still, the pressure grew. And then came the emergency meeting. They called it under the guise of a performance review. No real agenda, no formal vote, just the kind of room where decisions are made in glances, not words. Amara stood at the far end of the boardroom table. She wore no armor, just a simple blouse, ink-stained fingers, and the fire of 100 quiet victories in her eyes. One member cleared his throat. "We appreciate your commitment, Miss Lane," he said, "but some feel the gallery's direction is diverging from its legacy." Amara leaned forward. "Legacy without evolution is just a tomb." Murmurs. Another member spoke. "The gallery was built on a reputation of exclusivity, not community festivals." "You mean not accessibility?" she asked. "Not openness?" "That's not a legacy, that's a prison." The tension snapped tight. Then the doors opened, and Elias walked in. Silence fell. He didn't speak at first, just moved to stand beside Amara, offering her a slight nod. One board member stammered, "Mr. Crane, we weren't expecting." "I'm sure you weren't," he interrupted, "but I've been watching and listening." He placed a file on the table. "Inside this is legal documentation, finalizing full ownership of Somerset Gallery. The trust is no longer in control, and neither are you." Someone gasped. Another stood in protest, but Elias continued, calm and unbothered. "Amara Lane isn't just the future of this gallery. She is the gallery. Every painting on these walls remembers her presence. Every visitor who walked in this year saw themselves reflected in art because of her." He turned to her then. "I didn't just come back to fight for Somerset. I came back because I remembered what this place was meant to be." Amara's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "And what's that?" He smiled softly. "A home for truth." The board disbanded within the week. A few resigned. Some stayed and quietly shifted allegiance. Somerset Gallery didn't just survive, it bloomed. Amara became its creative director officially, and Elias, for the first time, stepped into the background by choice. He no longer needed to lead alone. One night, months later, they stood on the gallery rooftop after a community art night, the city below glittering like a sea of distant stars. "You know," she said quietly, "when I first walked into this place, I thought I didn't belong." "I know," he said. "I saw it in your eyes. What do you see now?" He turned to her. A woman who didn't just belong. She redefined the meaning of belonging. Amara looked at him. "So did you." They stood there, side by side. No confessions, no promises. Just the kind of stillness that only comes when two lives have already spoken volumes in silence. And somewhere in the distance, the city exhaled, because in a world where so many stories were left untold, this one had found its voice, and it would echo far beyond the walls that once tried to contain it.